Okay, let's jump right in. Today, we're digging into the incredible stories of African kings and queens who ruled vast empires, commanded huge armies, and really shaped history long before colonization. These are the kinds of leaders who, for some reason, don't always make it into the history books.
So let me ask you, when you think of pre-colonial Africa, what's the first thing that comes to mind? For a lot of us, right, the picture might be, well, a little fuzzy, a bit of a blank. And that's exactly what we're going to get into in this explainer.
You know, the way history is often taught, it leaves this massive blank space where this continent's vibrant and complex societies once thrived. So today, we're going to fill in some of that space with the stories of four remarkable rulers who paint a very, very different picture.
All right, first up, we're starting with a story of epic conquest. I mean, truly epic. We're talking about King PIYE, a ruler with so much ambition that he took on one of the most powerful empires in the entire ancient world.
But here's the thing. It wasn't just some power grab. What really drove him, according to what we've read, was this deep faith and this core idea of bringing people together. This was more than just a military campaign. For him, it was almost like a sacred mission to restore the true traditions of a land he saw as fractured.
So just to paint the picture for you, King PIYE was a king from Nubia, which was this powerful civilization just south of Egypt in modern-day Sudan. And he marches north and conquers Egypt. But get this, not to destroy it, but to unite these two great lands under his principles. An absolutely monumental achievement.
Okay, so we've seen military might, but what about cultural magnificence? Well, for that, let's meet OBA EWUARE the Great. This is a king who didn't just rule a city. He basically built a legend.
I mean, just listen to that description. A golden city. And that wasn't just some poetic flourish. He made it happen by totally revamping the kingdom's trade and organizing the city's famous artisan guilds. He turned Benin into an absolute powerhouse, known for its insane wealth, its groundbreaking creativity, and its formidable defenses. And it all really came down to these three pillars. First, you had this breathtaking art. I'm talking about the famous Benin bronzes, stuff we still marvel at today. Then there was constant innovation in how the city was run and how it was planned, and of course you had these massive walls to protect all that prosperity. What a combination. From a city builder, we now turn to a visionary of the seas. This next story is just incredible, full of ambition and a genuine historical mystery. Let's talk about Mansa Abubakari II. Just try to imagine the guts this took. We're talking about a time when the Atlantic was called the Sea of Darkness, and this emperor ruling the vast Mali Empire wasn't satisfied with all his land. He just had to know what was over the horizon, so much so that he was actually willing to give up his throne to find out. Wow. And this is where the story gets really mind-bending. The timeline we all learn in school, right? Columbus, 1492. But there's this theory that Mansa Abubakar II set sail from the Mali Empire around 1311. That's almost 200 years earlier. And some folks believe he may have actually reached the Americas first. It's a possibility that just completely flips our conventional timeline of world exploration on its head. For our final profile, we're shifting gears to a story of fierce defiance and brilliant strategy. As European powers started encroaching on the continent, one leader stood in their way, and she did it with unbelievable courage. Her name was Queen Nzinga. I think that just says it all, right? She wasn't a passive victim of history. No way. She was an active force, shaping it herself. For decades, she masterfully resisted Portuguese colonial expansion in what we now call Angola, becoming this huge symbol of resilience for her people. So, what was her secret? How did she manage it? Well, it was a pretty incredible formula. First, she ruled with absolute power and authority. Second, she was a master strategist, both in diplomacy and on the battlefield. She famously forged an alliance with the Dutch to fight their common enemy. And third, she led a fierce, relentless resistance that spanned decades. She was a warrior, a diplomat, and a queen, the whole package. So, let's zoom out for a second. We've looked at a unifier, a builder, an explorer, and a resistor. When you put all these incredible stories together, what kind of picture does that really paint? You can really see the diversity of leadership here, each one a powerhouse in their own right. You have King PIYE, the unifier, OBA EWUARE, the innovator, Abubakari II, the visionary, and Queen Nzinga, the resistor.
This isn't just one type of leadership, it's a whole spectrum of greatness. And that really is the key thing to take away from all this. These aren't just fascinating but isolated tales. They're pieces of evidence proving that pre-colonial Africa was a continent buzzing with powerful kingdoms, innovative societies, and incredible leaders who absolutely shaped the world.
Which kind of leaves us with one final big question, doesn't it? If these 4 incredible stories were largely hidden from history, it makes you wonder, whose stories are still out there, just waiting to be heard? And what else don't we know about our own world?
Today we're going to talk about a conqueror you've probably never heard of, a black pharaoh from the south who, get this, rose from what seemed like nowhere to save one of history's greatest empires from itself. And that raises a pretty wild question, right? Think about ancient Egypt. You probably picture this eternal, unshakable power. But believe it or not, there was a time when it was on the absolute brink of collapse. And the person who saved it? Well, he came from a place nobody saw coming. Okay, so to really get what's going on, we need to rewind a bit. Let's paint a picture of Egypt back in the 8th century BCE. And spoiler alert, it was not the unified, glorious kingdom you see in the movies. Not even close. It was really just a shadow of its former self.
I mean, just imagine, total political breakdown. The pharaoh's authority, gone. It had just crumbled. Instead, you had these local warlords and petty kings carving out their own little territories, constantly at each other's throats. But this wasn't just a political crisis. For the ancient Egyptians, this was a spiritual disaster. The temples were being neglected, and that meant the cosmic order itself, the very balance of the universe, was out of whack.
But here's where it gets really interesting. While Egypt is just falling apart, look at what was happening just to the south. The kingdom of Kush. It was the complete opposite. A picture of stability and strength. So where Egypt had all these rival warlords, Kush had one king. Where Egypt was ignoring its gods, Kush was fiercely devoted to the supreme god Amun. You can just feel this power imbalance growing, right? And it was about to change everything.
So, who's at the heart of this rising Kushite power? Its formidable king, a man who looked at the chaos in Egypt and didn't just see an opportunity for conquest. No, he saw it as a sacred duty.
So let me introduce you to PIYE. Now this guy, he was not your typical conqueror. His power wasn't just about armies, it came from this place of deep religious belief. He's ruling from the holy city of Napata, and his whole life is about discipline. He truly believed he was the chosen instrument of the god Amun, that he was destined to restore order. And so as he watched Egypt get weaker and weaker, he didn't rush in. Nope, he watched and he waited, with this incredible patience, just waiting for the perfect moment.
And that moment, it finally arrived. An ambitious northern Egyptian ruler, a guy named Tefnakht, tried to unite the Delta under his own banner. This was a direct challenge to Kushite influence, and for PIYE, that was it. That was the sign. It was time to act.
So, in 730 BCE, PIYE finally unleashes his army. And listen, this wasn't some small raid. This was a disciplined, unstoppable invasion force, just sweeping north along the Nile with terrifying speed and efficiency. City after city either just surrendered or was completely crushed by his organized Kushite warriors. The advance was just relentless, all building towards this inevitable showdown at the ancient capital, Memphis.
And this is so important to get about him. PIYE wasn't marching for treasure. He wasn't marching for gold or territory. This was a holy war. His whole mission was to restore the honor of the god Amun and reunite this broken land under divine authority. That gave his campaign a sense of purpose and power that these squabbling Egyptian warlords just couldn't compete with. Okay, so he gets to Memphis, and this is the big one, his greatest test. The city was heavily fortified. Everyone thought it was impenetrable. But PIYE, wow, he turned out to be a brilliant strategist. Instead of just a head-on assault, he used the Nile River itself as a weapon. He deployed a whole fleet of warboats to attack from the harbor side. This totally clever flanking move let his troops storm the walls. And just like that, Memphis, the heart of Lower Egypt, had fallen. So, after a victory like that, a total game changer, what do most conquerors do? They celebrate, they move into the palace, they start ruling, right? Well, PIYE did something else. He wanted to make absolutely sure that his story and his reason for this whole war was told for eternity. So he commissions this incredible thing, the Victory Stela. We're talking about a massive slab of granite just covered in inscriptions telling the entire story of his campaign, from his point of view.
It is one of the most amazing historical documents from this whole period. It's like a direct window right into his mind. And the stuff he put on this stela is just fascinating. I mean, of course, it lists his military victories, sure, but it also records his deep piety, his genuine disgust at how the Egyptian kings had let everything just fall apart. And here's one of my favorite little historical details. He actually scolds the defeated kings for letting their horses starve during the siege. It just shows you what kind of man he was. He valued strength, discipline, and order in absolutely everything, even how you treat your animals. So, think about it. He's done it. He's conquered the rival kings, he's taken the capital, he's reunited the two lands of Upper and Lower Egypt. The next logical step, the obvious step, is to move into the palace at Thebes or Memphis and rule as the new pharaoh, right?
Nope. Wrong. In what has to be one of the most surprising moves in all of ancient history. After achieving total victory, after being crowned pharaoh of Egypt, PIYE just turned around and went home. Back to his capital, Napata, in Kush.
So why? Why would he do that? This single decision tells you everything you need to know about his identity. For PA, Egypt was this sacred land that needed to be restored and protected, sure, but Kush was home. His actions were never about his own personal glory. They were about fulfilling what he saw as a divine mission. And by going back south, he cemented a legacy that's unlike any other.
What he did was found Egypt's 25th dynasty. It's often called the Nubian or Kushite dynasty, and he and the rulers who came after him, like the famous Pharaoh Taharqa, would rule over a reunited Egypt for almost 100 years. They brought in one of its last great periods of independence and cultural revival before the big foreign invasion started.
And you can literally see their unique identity even in how they were buried. PIYE wasn't buried at Giza with the other pharaohs. No, he was buried back home at El Kuru. And the Kushite pyramids, they just look different. They're not massive and broad like the famous Egyptian ones. They're steep, they're narrow, they're kind of fierce looking, a perfect reflection of the warrior kings who built them.
You know, in the end, PIYE's story is just this powerful reminder. Empires don't always rise where we expect them to. Power doesn't always flow from the big, established centers. Sometimes it comes from the disciplined, the faithful, the places that everyone else has overlooked, and it reshapes the world. It's a timeless lesson that really forces us to look beyond the obvious, and it makes you wonder, where is the next force for change quietly gathering its strength today? Okay, so forget what you think you know about ancient empires for a second. We're going deep, deep into the rainforests of West Africa, to a kingdom that built this incredibly sophisticated society, long before Europeans ever arrived. This is the story of the Kingdom of Benin, and the warrior king who basically forged it from chaos, OBA EWUARE the Great. I want you to just picture this. A massive, sprawling, meticulously organized city just emerging from the dense rainforest. And this wasn't just any city. No, this was the heart of an empire defined by order and immense power, all centered around a sacred throne. And the story of how it got that way, well, it all starts with one man's unbelievable journey. You see, before he was ever known as EWUARE the Great, he was just a guy named Prince Ogun, and his story doesn't start on some glorious throne. Nope, it starts as far from it as you can get, as an outcast, literally fighting for his life. The Benin that Prince Ogun grew up in, it was anything but a stable empire. The palace was just this web of conflict, of poison, of deadly rivalries. And for him, all this chaos didn't lead to a crown. It led to exile. He was cast out, forced to just disappear into the wilderness to survive. But here's the thing. He didn't just survive out there. He evolved. When he finally returned to claim the throne around 1440, he was a completely different person. The wild had forged him into this incredibly shrewd strategist, a determined leader who now had a crystal-clear vision for his kingdom. And he signaled this massive transformation with a new name, EWUARE. The meaning behind it is so powerful. The trouble has ceased. You know, this was both a promise to his people and, let's be honest, a warning to his enemies. He was there to end the chaos, and he was more than prepared to use force to do it. So, with the throne finally secured, EWUARE's very first move was just monumental. He didn't just want to rule a kingdom, he wanted to build an empire, one on unshakable foundations, both literally and figuratively. And this quote, this really gets to the absolute heart of his philosophy. EWUARE was a total pragmatist. He knew that for Benin to last, to actually endure, it needed order.
It needed clear lines of defense, and it needed a structure that projected absolute, undeniable power. So what does he do? He dramatically expands these massive earthworks around Benin City, this incredibly complex system of walls and moats. I mean, look at the scale of this thing. We are not talking about a simple fence here. These were some of the largest man-made structures of their time. It was a clear, loud statement to the entire world about the power of Benin.
And inside those walls, he was just as ambitious. He completely redesigned the city from the ground up. He laid out these wide, straight avenues, organized neighborhoods into their own districts, and built this grand palace complex right at the very center of it all. Benin wasn't just a city anymore. It was a true imperial capital.
But EWUARE knew that walls and roads, that was only the beginning. To build a real empire, he had to completely remake the entire political landscape of the kingdom. He had to centralize all power in his own hand. And you can see just how systematic he was about it. He launched these relentless military campaigns, but he wasn't just raiding, he was conquering, absorbing, and completely reorganizing. He took this loose collection of different territories and forged them into a single, cohesive regional power, with everything under his direct authority.
And this led to the most fundamental shift in power you can imagine. Before EWUARE, all the authority was spread out among these powerful, noble families and hereditary chiefs. EWUARE shattered that system. He made sure that all power, all authority, flowed from one place and one place only, from him, the OBA.
And he did it so strategically. It was like a master chess game. He systematically weakened the old chiefs, and then he replaced their influence with a new class of officials, men who were loyal only to him. He built a whole new government bureaucracy where being the king wasn't just a political job. It was sacred, it was divine, and it was absolutely unquestionable. So, with his political and military power totally consolidated, EWUARE turned to another, maybe unexpected tool of empire: culture. He understood that to make his legacy permanent, he had to write it not just in laws, but in bronze and in ivory.
He formalized the royal guilds of master craftsmen, bringing them right into the palace to work directly for the state. And their incredible creations, these absolute masterpieces of bronze casting and ivory carving, would become famous all across the globe. We know them today as the Benin bronzes, many of which are right at the center of today's debates about art repatriation.
And just look at what this art was depicting. These weren't just random pretty designs. They showed scenes of conquest. They had portraits of the kings. They captured royal ceremonies. Every single piece was a narrative, telling the story of the kingdom's history and its power, all from the OBA's point of view. And this is the most important thing to get. These were not just beautiful objects. They were state-sanctioned documents, cast in metal. Each plaque was like a page in the official history book of Benin, immortalizing the king's authority and declaring to all future generations that this kingdom was eternal. So what was the lasting impact of this incredible reign? Well, when EWUARE died around 1473, he had fundamentally and permanently reshaped his entire kingdom. He completely transformed the very idea of what it meant to be king. He elevated the OBA to this divine, spiritual protector. Under his leadership, Benin's influence just soared. Its trade routes expanded, and it gained this widespread reputation for immense wealth, strict discipline, and a highly structured society. You know, in the end, EWUARE's greatest achievement wasn't a single battle he won, or a wall he built. It was the system he created. He took a kingdom that was on the brink of total collapse, and gave it structure, he gave it culture, and he gave it a legacy of permanence that would endure for centuries. Which really leaves us with a fascinating question, right? What is it that truly turns a ruler into a legend? Is it the military conquests, political genius, or is it the ability to forge an enduring identity, a story that's told in bronze and stone that outlasts the person who created it? The legacy of OBA EWUARE, well, it suggests the answer is a powerful combination of all three. Imagine you're the ruler of a massive golden empire. You have unimaginable wealth, absolute power, but none of it matters, because you're obsessed with one simple, forbidden question. What lies beyond the edge of the world? So here's the big question that sits at the heart of this whole story. It's a huge one, and it challenges a lot of what we think we know about history. Let's dive in and meet the man behind this incredible mystery. Our story really kicks off with this one guy, a king, standing out on the coast, looking out at the Atlantic Ocean. Now, for pretty much everyone else on Earth at the time, that ocean was the end of the map, a terrifying, impassable barrier. But for him, it was a question that he just had to answer.
So let's meet him, Mansa Abubakari II. And when I say king, I really mean emperor. He was in charge of one of the most powerful and wealthy empires on the planet. But you know what? His real defining feature wasn't his power or his gold. It was this relentless, burning curiosity to see what was just over that horizon.
Now, to really wrap your head around just how wild Abubakari's ambition was, you've got to understand the world he was ruling. We're not talking about some small kingdom with big dreams here. This was a global superpower.
I mean, just look at this. The Mali Empire's power was built on a ton of gold, sure, but it was so much more than that. It controlled the major trade routes, had booming markets, and was home to intellectual powerhouses like Timbuktu. You had scholars there debating everything from astronomy to philosophy. The point is, they had the money, the brains, and the logistics to try something truly insane.
So, yeah, you can just toss out any of those old, outdated ideas about medieval Africa being isolated. That's just not the reality. We're talking about a dynamic, connected, and incredibly influential empire. And that power is the key to everything that happens next. Okay, so with this massive empire behind him, Abubakari turns his focus west to that big, scary ocean. And the story of what he did, well, it comes to us from the man who would take his place, the legendary Mansa Musa.
So Abubakari's obsession leads him to launch not one, but two huge expeditions. The first was already massive. 200 ships sailing into the total unknown. But look at the outcome, a complete disaster. Just about any other ruler would have stopped right there. But Abubakari, he didn't just try again. He went bigger, a lot bigger.
Can you imagine being that one captain who made it back? He tells this terrifying story about some kind of river in the middle of the ocean that just swept the entire fleet away. It wasn't a setback, it was an absolute catastrophe. And that's the news that lands on the emperor's desk.
And his response to that horrifying news? This number, 2,000 ships. He orders a new fleet 10 times the size of the first one that failed so spectacularly. 1,000 boats for the crew, and another 1,000 just for supplies. This isn't just persistence anymore. This is an all-consuming obsession.
Okay, but this next part is what takes the story from just an ambitious voyage to something else. Something totally unique in the history books. To lead this second massive expedition, Abubakari made a choice that almost no other ruler ever has made.
He didn't just pay for the trip. He gave up everything for it. He deliberately chose his successor, Mansa Musa. Then he formally abdicated the throne. He gave it all away. And then he walked onto a ship to personally lead the fleet into the unknown. He literally traded absolute power for a question mark. So, what happened to that fleet of 2,000 ships and the emperor at its helm? Well, they sailed west and just vanished. And this is where the story gets really complicated, where it enters the realm of fierce historical debate. Did they actually make it?
The debate is pretty fascinating. On one hand, you have the direct testimony from Mansa Musa. We also know for a fact that the ocean currents could have acted like a conveyor belt, pushing the fleet right towards Brazil. And as we've said, the Mali Empire definitely had the resources. But on the other hand, there are no official written records from Mali that confirm the voyage. And the biggest issue? There's no definitive archaeological proof in the Americas. No smoking gun.
And so, for now, we're left with this incredible story, this tantalizing possibility, and a mystery that might just never be solved. The fleet disappeared, and the truth of where they ended up disappeared right along with it.
But here's the thing. Whether Abubakari's ships ever touched American shores or were just lost to the sea, the story itself is what's really important, because in this case, the ambition might actually matter more than the outcome.
The story of Abubakari completely flips our view of the 14th century on its head. It shows that this drive to explore, this need to know what's over the horizon, wasn't just a European thing. It was alive and well in one of Africa's most powerful empires. And it seems like it was driven by pure, simple curiosity.
And that's the real core of his personal story. Think about it. He wasn't beaten in a war. He wasn't overthrown in a coup. He had it all, the gold, the power, the security, and he willingly walked away from it.
He chose the possibility of discovery over the certainty of power.
And that really just leaves us with one final thought. What on earth is worth more than a throne? Well, for Mansa Abubakari II, the answer was knowledge. It was the chance, no matter how small, to finally answer that nagging question: what's out there, beyond the horizon?
You know, every now and then in history, you come across a figure so powerful, their life story sounds more like a legend than actual fact. Today, we're diving into the incredible life of Queen Nzinga Mbande, a ruler who stared down an empire and simply refused to be broken.
So, let's set the scene. Picture it. It's the 1600s, and we're on the western coast of Central Africa. This was a time of huge change and pretty intense conflict. The world was literally being reshaped by these powerful forces sailing in from across the ocean.
Now you gotta understand, these weren't ships of friendly exploration or trade, not in the way we might think. No, these were the vessels of the Portuguese Empire, and their arrival kicked off the terrifying expansion of the Atlantic slave trade, turning the port of Luanda into a horrific gateway of human suffering.
And it was right into the middle of this escalating storm that Nzinga was born. To really get who she became as a queen, we first have to understand the world and the pressures that forged her.
So Nzinga's home was the Kingdom of Ndongo, and it was a major regional power. But it was facing a threat like nothing before. European firearms, these devious colonial tactics designed to divide them, and just this insatiable demand for enslaved people.
Now, because she was a member of the royal family, you might think she was shielded from all this. But no way. She grew up right in the thick of it, observing her father's court, listening in on war councils, and learning the incredibly complex art of diplomacy. From a very young age, she got it. She understood a fundamental truth of her time: to rule was to survive.
And this is where we get to the moment that cemented her name in history. And funny enough, it wasn't on a battlefield. It was in a negotiation room, where Nzinga pulled a move so brilliant, so clever, people are still talking about it centuries later.
Okay, so in 1622, Nzinga is sent to Luanda to negotiate a peace treaty with the Portuguese governor. To show his dominance, the governor is sitting up on this elevated chair, and he offers Nzinga just a floor mat to sit on. This was a total power move, a deliberate slap in the face.
So what do you do in that situation? Right, it's a calculated insult. If you protest, you look weak. If you accept the mat, you're basically admitting you're inferior. This was a massive test of her political skill.
Nzinga didn't even flinch. She just signals to one of her attendants, who gets down on all fours, becoming a living human throne. Nzinga then sits right on her back, raising herself to the exact same height as the governor.
I mean, talk about a stunning piece of political theater. The message was unmistakable. She wasn't just demanding respect, she was showing him and the world that Ndongo would not be treated like some lesser state. Her gambit totally worked, and a temporary treaty was signed. But, as you can probably guess, that peace was fragile. It was short-lived. After her brother died, Nzinga claimed the throne for herself, but her rule was immediately hit with challenges from literally all sides.
Externally, the Portuguese saw the chaos as an opportunity and flat-out refused to acknowledge her as the legitimate ruler. And that played right into the hands of her rivals internally, who used it to challenge her authority. She was hemmed in and had to make a really bold choice.
So what does she do? Well, her response was an absolute masterstroke of strategy. This wasn't a retreat, it was a repositioning. She led her followers to the neighboring kingdom of Matamba, a place she could fortify. And there, she rebuilt her army, welcomed people who had escaped Portuguese captivity into her forces, and created a powerful new base to fight back from.
And from this new stronghold, Nzinga launched a war of resistance against the Portuguese that would last for nearly 4 decades. This is where she really showcased her genius as a military commander.
Look, Nzinga was smart. She knew she couldn't go head-to-head with Portuguese firepower in a traditional battle. So, she didn't. Instead, she mastered unconventional warfare. We're talking hit-and-run guerrilla tactics, surprise raids. And she was a master diplomat too, even forming a temporary alliance with the Dutch when they showed up to challenge Portugal in the region.
Let that number sink in for a second. 40 years. She kept a fight going against a global empire for 4 decades. In an era of constant chaos and upheaval, that kind of longevity, that is a victory in and of itself.
And she wasn't just a military genius. She was completely shattering the rules of her time. She didn't command from some safe place in the rear. No, she personally led her troops into battle. She even adopted royal titles that were traditionally held only by male rulers, completely redefining what it meant to hold power.
You know you're doing something right when your own enemies can't help but be impressed. In their own records, the Portuguese, the people who fought her for decades, described her as fierce, calculating, and brilliant, a truly formidable opponent.
So after this lifetime of constant warfare, what's the final legacy of this incredible queen? Well, her impact is really a story of endurance and just sheer defiance.
Her life shows this remarkable evolution, right? You see her go from the defiant diplomat in 1622 to the warrior queen leading a decades-long war, and then finally to this elder stateswoman who negotiates a final peace on her own terms. And she died in her 80s completely undefeated.
And don't think for a second this was just symbolic. Her resistance had a real, tangible impact. She seriously slowed down Portugal's colonial ambitions in the region, which protected her people's independence for generations. It's no wonder that today she's a national hero in Angola, a symbol of resilience and strategic brilliance.
And this really gets to a crucial point about her legacy. Victory isn't always about completely crushing your opponent. Sometimes it's about endurance. She couldn't drive the Portuguese back into the sea, but she absolutely denied them the total submission, the total victory that they demanded.
In the end, Nzinga's story is just this powerful, powerful reminder. It tells us that throughout history, even in the face of overwhelming force, there have always been those who find a way to stand up, to fight back, and to carve out their own destiny. She wasn't just a queen. She was a force of nature who simply refused to kneel.